Hey, what's up, everybody? We are here on the Dialogue podcast, and we're venturing out a little bit. Usually it's me and Shaylin, but I'm here with my friend Audra Christie. Thank you so much, Audra, for taking time to be on this. And this podcast is a dialogue. That's what it's going to be. I'm gonna kind of ask you questions, but before I do, I'm going to introduce you. All right, because the last thing anybody wants to have to do is self-promote. All right. So Audra is she is an executive coach. Her company is called Mindset Change Coaching, and she is the CEO, president, full-blown leader, head woman in charge of the company. Comes with an extensive background in corporate America. Has worked either working or consulting with some of the most well-known brands in the world. Walmart, ever heard of it? United Airlines, ever heard of it? Ulta Beauty, okay, which when I think about Ulta Beauty and the Ford family, it's kind of like when I go through a major city, right? Like I'm in downtown New York and I walk past like a cathedral, I feel like I just need to do the honor of going into that cathedral. I can't just walk past the cathedral. I have to go in and I have to pray because I just feel like that's the right thing to do. That's how my wife feels about Ulta Beauty, right? Wherever we're at, she can't just walk back. We got to go in and make a sacrifice. Right. So thank you for your work there. Universal Music, Hanes Brands, Converse, Starbucks, Bed Bath & Beyond, and Yum. What is Yum? I feel like I should know what that is.
Pizza Hut.
Oh, Pizza Hut.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for taking time to come on here. Aside from her illustrious career, she's helped a lot with our church, is one of the members here at ONE.CHURCH, and has offered her time to really help coach our leaders. I've personally benefited a lot from Audra and just been very generous in sharing her time and expertise with our team, really helping us from an organizational standpoint, and even just getting people working in their best energy, bringing them their best selves to the church. You think of church, the first thing you think about is what we do on Sundays and all of that, but there really is an organizational element to it where we want to make sure that we are operating as professionals because people are doing this for a living, but at the same time not losing the heart of what we're doing. So you've helped make us much, much better. So thank you very much for being here. Audra, why don't you real quick give us a snapshot of your background, a little bit maybe about kind of how you grew up, where you grew up, a little bit of that. And I'll just say this up front. If you see me looking at my phone, I'm not texting, I'm not Snapchatting, okay? It would be, I've written down some notes and I would be writing more notes. So I just want to let you know from an etiquette perspective, that's what I'm doing. I'm totally engaged. And as long as I've known you and as many conversations as we've had, I don't think you've ever interrupted, ever. Like, I think it's just like, you don't interrupt, but you can interrupt, okay? In this podcast, this is a dialogue. If you want to interrupt, you cut in at any time for any reason, all right? So I'm going to kick it to you. Share us a little bit snapshot of your background.
Yeah, so thank you. It is a pleasure to be here. I'm so excited to work with the church and super honored and humbled to just have this time with you. So grew up on the East Coast, humble beginnings. My dad was my biggest influence. While back then I didn't have the language to call it executive presence, but he taught me a lot. I was kind of like a detached observer. So he was a truck driver, he was a chef, but when it was time for him to get down to business, he was all about it. So he looked the part, he acted the part, he dressed the part, and he always taught me that there's no attachment to doing the right thing. So you don't have to have an emotional connection to doing what's right. You just need to do it, and you need to show up, and you need to get it done. So that was always like my barometer in life. And I worked in New York over 30 years. So I started out in finance. I worked for the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. I was a financial analyst, and then at some point I transitioned into HR. And while I love helping people, I get really pumped helping organizations think about their strategy and bringing their culture to life. So fast forward, got married to a wonderful gentleman named Bobby. We have a 14-year-old little girl. Her name is Ava Grace. And I've traveled the world. I've traveled extensively across Asia, Latin America, and South Africa. And one thing that I know to be true is that people need to hear the unvarnished truth. And I find that being an executive coach and working on my own, that we assume that people know, and they just don't know. And usually when people give you permission to give them the truth, there's always an ouch or sting, but they're better for it. And so many people have called me after the ouch or the sting, which could extend over years when they don't talk to me. But it was that moment where I delivered the unvarnished truth that made them a better leader. So I love what I do. I know that I was made to be an executive coach. And when I walked away from corporate America in 2020, I never looked back, because it was just, I am walking in my destiny.
So when you talk about giving the unvarnished truth, right? Giving that feedback, maybe somebody has a blind spot, maybe for one reason or another, there's something that someone hasn't told them. And the fear around that is maybe you're risking the relationship, or you would hurt someone when that's not your intention. How have you gotten to the place where you're able to work that through to where you can give that, like, do you have that fear when you're giving it? Like, do you have a sense of anxiety around how is this person, are they even going to receive it? Do you take that into account? Like, are you thinking like, how receptive is this person? Or are you like, you know what? I'm not going to even try to estimate that. I'm just going to give the unvarnished truth, and then it's up to them. Or do you have any social anxiety or relational anxiety around doing that? Or have you just over time, how do you deal with that?
Well, pretty easy to do, because I'm from the East Coast, so very direct.
So it's a culture. It's just part of the culture.
So, I probably woke up that way, right? And when you hire me, because I don't work with everyone, during our chemistry meeting, I ask them very curious questions to figure out, if they can handle it. And if they can't handle me during the chemistry meeting, then I typically won't sign them.
Interesting.
And then second, they're paying me to make the leader better. So I don't have any attachment, because there's not much I haven't seen. And typically I ask one life question, and it is, tell me, what is the one piece of feedback that you received in your life, across life and business, that you couldn't get over? And typically that goes back to something that happened when they were 6 years old all the way up to 6th grade. And it tells me everything I need to know. And typically, they have imposter syndrome, right? They've gotten to these levels because of people that they know, and sometimes it's working hard. Excuse me. But I'm not going to say I don't care. They need to hear it, because what's happening in leadership is the people around them have so many filters that they never get the truth. And because they hire me to be their confidant, to be their translator, I can just see the behavior right away, and it's my duty to call it out. So part of my purpose is to deliver the unvarnished truth, one leader at a time, so I don't have any anxiety around it.
You know what's interesting is, your calling or your mission, like what you've aimed yourself at, it is a very specific, unique thing, in that you're going, hey, I'm taking high achievers and I want to help them become super high achievers, right? Which obviously there is a great calling in someone that would say, hey, I'm going to take someone, from a, lower position to a little bit higher position, or I'm going to help somebody. Shayla and I have talked a lot about our boys having special needs, right? And there are people literally who are just incredibly skilled, gifted, like almost magical around how they can work with, like they can just decode, like they understand their instincts. There's like a whole way they communicate. It's just amazing. Like I've marveled at watching. And so there are some people, I think, again, that are gifted that way. And then others that would say, hey, I'm actually taking someone that's already, maybe really high skilled, high potential, and helping them go from high to really high, and it's interesting. I was listening to Marshall Goldsmith, who is like, he's a corporate coach. He's written, I think it's called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And
yes.
There's another one I can't remember.
Tons of books.
Yeah, tons of books. But he's done a lot of corporate coaching as well. And he said he noticed a correlation between the highest achievers that he worked with and how little time they spent with him. Right. So he said, actually, the people he spent the least amount of time with did the best, and the people he spent the most amount of time with did worse. And he goes, at first I was like, what's wrong with me? He goes, actually, one of his greatest clients that he worked with said, it really gets down to your selection, because if you're having to spend tons and tons of time trying to connect the dots for someone, or you're trying to, it takes this huge investment on your part. It's actually, maybe you might have picked the wrong client. If you have someone though, that if they just need a little bit of aiming, a little bit of clarity, you ask a good clarifying question, they can get themselves, or you can help them get oriented, and then they've got a motor, to power through. So he said, like, one of your biggest challenges is in selecting who you're going to work with. It just triggered that thought when you were talking about your chemistry meeting, and what are you looking for? Like, when you're saying yes to working with someone, or like, man, this is a person or a group that I want to work with. In that chemistry meeting, are you looking at the potential of the leader? Are you looking at the attitude of the leader? Are you looking at what work they're doing specifically? All of the above. How do you make your selections?
I'm looking for someone who's going to trust me early, because when I'm your executive coach, I have to be the person that you trust. So I typically start the meeting, trust no one. And every time I say that, people have this reaction like, what do you mean? You just can't do it, particularly at certain levels in the organization, because the stakes are too high. The second thing is, I'm listening for someone who's unwilling to learn what they think they know about leadership and their impact with their team. And then the third is, what's your level of self-awareness? Because I can see the behavior right away. And I wanted to just call out something that you said that I never thought about. You said, I never interrupt. The reason why I don't interrupt is because I'm listening for patterns. So the more space I give someone to speak, I'm listening to their pattern of thinking, the pace of their words, the tone and texture, and it tells me a lot about that person. But typically, so many people listen to interrupt, and I hate that, and I don't like to do it. Even though people interrupt me, I try not to do it, because at some point, I believe before I leave this earth, that someone will just listen without interrupting.
That's good. So, you talk a lot about executive presence. I know that's your a big part of what you do, right?
Yes.
You coach executives. Can you define that? What is executive presence?
So most people will say it's how you look. It's the gravitas that you project. It's when you walk into a room, do you have the it factor? What I teach people is a little different, that your executive presence is what you want the person to remember about you in order for them to shape the narrative so you can be known for what you want to be known for. And I also think, well, not that I think, I know that executive presence is just beyond the wardrobe, right? So the book that I'm working out is Executive Presence, Taking Your Image Beyond the Wardrobe. It's about those awkward moments. It's when that you can say, you know what, enough about me. Let me show up in a way that the receiver, and that could be your leader, that could be the person that you're talking to, that could be a group, it could be your team. It's what they need in the moment that you need to shape your words, and you need to craft your messaging so that they can walk away smarter, faster.
So when you're working with someone, I would assume that with people, you have a combination of like some standard qualities of executive presence. So there are certain things that everyone needs to do, and then there are some that are just completely and totally custom and unique to the person. So you're kind of is that true? Like, are you, when you're looking at somebody, you're going, hey, here are just some fundamentals this person's violating, and this is true no matter what business you're in, no matter who you are, no matter whether you're more formal or informal, or whatever your particular voice or style is, these are just foundational, and then other things that are very custom. Is that true?
Yeah, so it's twofold. It's image, what you look like, and the other part is about your communication, what you sound like. Can you get to the point quickly? I have a story that I always share, that if it's a 30-minute meeting, you need to plan for 15, and if you want to get invited back, get to the message in 7 minutes. And most people cannot get to the point quickly. And part of that is they don't write it down. So they'll end sentences, and I think this is a pet peeve of mine. When they say something, they'll say, does that make sense? Mm. Well, it doesn't. You know it didn't make sense when it rolled off your tongue. And you really don't want me to answer you in the moment, particularly if you're in a large setting, because then how are you going to come back from that? Mm-hmm. So I just find that people ramble. They're not used to white space. They're not used to the pregnant pause. They just go on and on and on, and that's because they don't have a lot of confidence and they don't really know what they want to say. So I teach people, set your intention. If I'm ever meeting with you, I always think about what are the 3 things that I can say that's going to make him smarter, faster about a topic that he doesn't know about, or something that's going to make you get to yes faster, like make a decision pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. A lot of this is human behavior.
Yeah. It's interesting hanging out with you and having you, bring your eyes and ears and brain to our organization, and just stuff that, you pick up on or you question, even if it's like, again, little throwaway lines or language that you kind of challenge, like what's behind that, right? Things that I wouldn't have even necessarily thought of. So I remember one time you and I were talking, and I was describing, I think, a personnel issue that we were trying to get clear on and trying to make a good decision on. And so I was describing that situation, and I said, well, but it is what it is. And you're like, whoa. Excuse me. Wrong statement. You're like, let's not say that. It is what it is. And essentially, it forced me to think about, what do I mean by that? Or even like when you were saying, what was the one you just said a second ago? The
smarter, faster?
No, it was when people say,
oh,
does that make sense? Oh. Right? Does that make sense? Well, essentially, I think someone's saying is, did what I say just land? But I think, what's a better way to say that? Would it be to have them say back to you, like, hey, what did you hear me say? Or like, because I could see, like, if I'm communicating with a group and I'm trying to make them smarter, faster, I've made the mistake of assuming that everything I just said landed. I'm trying to remember who said the biggest myth in communication is that it ever happened, right? So, So like, I don't want to just move on and assume that it's as clear in your head as it is in mine. So how would you prompt someone to, or make sure that we're aligned before we plunge into this next part of the conversation? How would you coach someone to get that alignment without just saying, does it make sense? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Because I guess I've done that before, where then people go, no, it doesn't make sense. Can you boil that down for me? Or can you maybe say it again in a more concise way? And it forced me to do that. And of course, to improve my executive presence and to get better, I will start getting better at that, because like you said, you rehearse it, you think about it, you prepare it, you write it down, you get better at that, so people don't have to keep asking you to re-say it or to make it simpler or whatever. Mm-hmm. But how would you coach someone as they're a work in progress in that area, instead of, does that make sense? What would you coach them to say?
Well, the statement, does that make sense, is very inwardly focused. That's about you looking for validation for someone to say yes or no to your nonsense that's coming off of your tongue. Like, it doesn't make any sense. So you're just looking for someone to say, just give me, like, throw me a ball or something. Yeah. I don't know.
You're feeling self-conscious and you want affirmation.
Like, you want affirmation. Yeah. So I would say, read the room, look at their face, because most people will say, can you repeat that? Or it doesn't make sense, but they're not going to say that out loud. They may catch you after the meeting. So I coach people to say, read the room and say, listen, I've said a lot. Let me stop here to see if there's any clarification that's needed. And then I'll look around and no one won't say anything, and then I'll keep going. But I'm not going to have you affirm me when I haven't practiced what I needed to say, because I need to feel good in the moment. I think it's very selfish, and we do it so much. And you can kind of manipulate people to say, yes, it makes sense, because the way I figure it out is when, just say if I'm saying my purpose is to deliver the unvarnished truth, does that make sense? You immediately go into that, does that make sense? And I'm kind of forced to say yes, versus, I'm going to deliver the unvarnished truth. Are you tracking with me? Is that clear? So people feel a little bullied into saying, yes, that makes sense, because they don't want to make you feel bad, but they don't want to be the one who's called out to say, well, I'm probably the only one that's not tracking.
Yeah. So, you know, it was an interesting shift for me in terms of leadership in the last couple years. So we have seasonal board meetings, so 3 board meetings a year with our board. And so I preach every Sunday. And every Sunday when I do my message, I'll preach it at least twice, front to back, sweaty, before it goes to the church. Because I don't want the folks that show up at 9 to feel like they got the run through the rough draft. Like, I want them to get every bit as good of a message as everybody else. So and to me, those extra reps help it really crystallize in my mind. So I go pretty extensive lengths to prepare and present. So then I do these board meetings 3 times a year, which are high stakes. We're making big decisions. It's people I don't talk to every day. They're high octane leaders. Their brain trust is very valuable. And the team doesn't have a ton of chemistry because we're not together that much. And so I would prepare. So I had my slide deck and I kind of looked it through, but I would go into these meetings and I would just leave like it didn't go that good. I don't feel like I presented well. I felt like I was. And so it didn't strike me until like 2 years ago to start actually presenting the entire board meeting before the board meeting. So now before the board meetings, I'll have 3 or 4 people, some of our executive leaders on our staff, and I literally run basically a fake board meeting to them. I do the whole presentation, let them ask questions, give feedback, so that when I go in, I'm really stewarding those people's time well. And it has gone infinitely better. Like, just so, you know, the level of presentation, sometimes if you go, what's the proper amount of presentation for a meeting, right? If I'm having some kind of planning meeting or we're doing a strategy meeting, you know, we go, well, do I have a slide deck? Like, how would you coach someone of like, are there rules of thumb? Are there ways that you coach around how prepared someone should be for a meeting? Should they do the run through? Should they tell the story beforehand? How much do you just trust yourself in the moment? And how much do you pre-prepare? What's your advice on that?
I would say, but before I say that, so you are brilliant at landing the plane and your storytelling is amazing. And you always think through what is the crayon version. Most people think they need to, you said high octane, speak and present at this level, and they're not doing it in the most simplistic way. And that's probably half of the battle. The other piece around presentation, so there's one group of people that will make a slide and read everything on the slide. Drives me nuts. And then there's another group of people who, I got this, I can just wing it. Know your audience, but you have to think about, if I only had 5 minutes of uninterrupted time with them, what are the 3 things that I'm going to say to make them smarter faster? So that's like my thing. And then the second thing is make sure that someone in the room knows what you're going to present before you get into that meeting, just so they can throw you a lifeline, or if it goes off, if it gets off balance, there's someone that knows what you're talking about, and you two can kind of co-present a little bit so they can save you. I had a horrible experience where I didn't do that, and I thought I was going to get fired until someone rushed in and saved me and gave me some unvarnished feedback. Yeah. And I'm still scarred. I'm still in therapy for it, but it was a valuable lesson that the most senior person in the room should know what you're talking about, and to say less. I think less is more.
So you mentioned a moment ago when someone's has a slide deck and they're just reading down the slide deck, that doesn't sit well with you. Is that because it is signaling that they don't have mastery of the content? Is it that it's just slowing it down? Like, why does that rub you the wrong way?
They haven't been taught to put a PowerPoint slide together. Like, there are rules and tips and tricks on how many words should go on the slide. Number 2, they're rewarded for the detail, and they don't get an opportunity to present at high levels where you say less is more. So their day-to-day, they're in the details, and that's how they speak, and that's how they would present. The other thing is, you don't have to do any work. You don't have to anticipate questions. You don't have to read the room. You don't have to study body language. And most people are afraid to say they don't know something. So they'll study, they'll memorize, but the minute there's a question that they haven't anticipated or they don't know how to recover from, then it goes in shambles. So I typically tell people, present, give me your deck, and then in the meeting, turn it over, and you're not allowed to look at the deck.
So you mentioned before a term I've heard you share a lot and has become part of our sort of shorthand language internally now is the unvarnished truth, right? So the idea of just really shooting people straight. How do you work your way through that? So when I imagine myself giving the unvarnished truth, at its best, it's this open and shut case that's just clearly right, and I'm just giving them this gift, and then they can take it or leave it. But at other times, I may not even be totally sure if it's just my opinion, my perspective of what I believe is the truth or how I'm seeing it. And so at those times, sometimes I struggle a little bit to go, what should I do with this? Do you ever struggle with that? Like when you say unvarnished truth, how do you know that what you're telling me or what you're saying to me or someone else is really the facts or the truth, or how much of it is just your perception? Like, how do you work your way through that?
So typically, I've received enough exhibits or enough information to start to see the pattern. And then as I'm coaching someone, I'm listening to how they're thinking about something, and typically it's rooted in a level of emotion. And also their body language would tell me that they've never really received feedback that rocked them through the core. So I don't have any connection to delivering the truth. Now, I'm not just going to walk up to someone and say, you know what, I think that couch over there is just the wrong color, and I'm really ashamed that no one on your staff told you that's the wrong color. I'm going to say, so tell me how you came across with that blue, and why did you think that was the blue?
How'd you end up with that hideous couch?
How'd you end up with it? And what is your connection to it? But typically in leadership, it's the same behaviors. And I can tell if someone has had a crucial conversation, that's like baseline. I can tell if someone has been shepherded through a memorable conversation, which is you're getting close. Now, I believe in you, but the impact you're making on the team is really making it difficult for people to work with you and stay, and you got to knock it off and you have to stop. The unvarnished truth is, so this isn't working out, and it's not salvageable, and it's probably time that we part ways. That's in terms of just leadership behavior. Or I'm coaching someone right now, and she suffers from male stuff. And to me, that goes back to some kind of impaired relationship with a male in her life, could have been a dad, uncle, brother, that she never felt like she was good enough. So she leads with that. And I would say, you make too much money for that. Like, they pay you well on the front end, and this has nothing to do with gender. So we're not going to get caught up in half of the world, if not more, male and female. Like, we need to move beyond that. Like, what is really the root cause of that? And then I typically ask permission before I give someone like the unvarnished truth. And it stings. Like, people say they want the truth, but they can't handle it. They really can't handle it. And my job is to give it to them because I know it's going to make them better, and to create space for them to absorb it and hear it and sit in that for a little bit to say, wow, no one's ever really shared that with me. And typically they come back in a day or two, but they're fuming. Like, they're mad at me. They want to hang up the phone. They want to leave the meeting. But I'm like, yeah, how you feeling about that? Well, I'm a little emotional. Well, that matches. You should be. You can't go around treating people that way. And most people, they can't handle it, but they need it. Because, that ignites behavior change. At least that's my
I would imagine you probably have quite a few as well who have heard it before. And so in some ways that's a sore spot because they may have heard it in their personal life. They may have heard it in some way has come up in different ways. And maybe the people delivered it poorly or maybe not. But you have someone who, like you said, if you have an emotional trigger around a certain kind of feedback or something that's being said to you, whether it's, hey, no one's ever said that. But I would imagine, I could be wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would imagine you probably encounter a lot of people that are like, they have heard that multiple times. For whatever reason, they're still unable to receive it. It feels like an attack when it's not. It's again, something that if you don't work your way through, it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you opportunity. It's going to cost you influence. But if you can figure it out, you're exponentially improve your effectiveness.
Well, the people who claim that they heard it before, they have no fear of losing their job or losing a deal or losing a friendship or losing a relationship. There's no attachment to consequences. So they continue behaving poorly. Typically, when I'm brought in, they're one step out the door. It's like, if I don't get it right now, then I'm done. My credibility is shot. The board doesn't have confidence in me. Because the minute you tell people that, hey, the organization is losing confidence in you, then it's like, then I better shape up.
Yeah. Do you see people a lot of times like, I think for every criticism, there's some kind of self-soothing internal soundbite that you could say. So if people say Greg Ford's a jerk, I can say, well, I just tell the truth. I'm a straight shooter. They just can't handle the truth. Or, I think if you go down the line, like whatever it is, like, Greg Ford procrastinates. Like, well, I'm creative, or whatever, right? I mean, I think they don't understand true creatives or whatever, right? How do you deal with that when somebody kind of has found, whether it's a self-soothing, whether they actually believe it, and sometimes, nobody's perfectly well-rounded. You have people who you're trying to quantify. Like I think about teammates we have who have a really overt strength, and then they have a weakness that makes them a liability on a team, and you got to kind of try to do the valuation. How much are we willing to tolerate this because they bring such, rare artistry, but over here they're a liability. How much should you go ahead and take the good with the bad, or how much do you go, no, we are going to hold this line right here. You either hit this line, or I don't care how talented you are, you're out of here. How would you tackle that?
So I don't reward, so there's two things. There's the what and the how. If you're phenomenal at getting results, but you're leaving dead bodies, then you're a liability and you have to go.
So would you say even from an intention standpoint, so if you have someone who is not mean-spirited, they want to play well with others, it's not an issue of will, it's an issue of skill. It's an issue of, this is a very good person, we just need to train them better, or we need to, versus someone who maybe doesn't care about the people around them, is unwilling to work at it, or is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I guess I'm saying that when it gets to that point, it tells me that the contract between the leader and the associate hasn't been set up. So if I'm working with you, our first conversation, or our second or third, I should understand your expectations. I should understand what the culture is here. I should understand, hey, I can do this, but I can't do that. And we don't treat people horribly. I don't care how talented you are. The problem is we don't say those things, and the behavior gets so out of control, then you want to try to fix it right away, but you didn't set it up right the first time. Because typically, if you say it right the first time, you shouldn't have to repeat it when it comes to leadership. And not in all cases. And then the second is, we assume that people know how to be teammates. We assume that people know how to collaborate. We assume that leaders, just because they have a title, that they know how to lead, and that's not true. So there is an element of cohesiveness and high-performing team-related stuff that you need to take an organization through so they could start to live out the culture. You can't remind them of the culture when they're behaving poorly, but you haven't set up the expectations up front. So I don't have a big tolerance for bad behavior, because when people are crying, people are upset, they feel like it's a hostile work environment, I don't really care how good you are, because you need to think about, it's not about me, and how am I impacting others? And I always ask the question to the organization that hires me, what do you reward? Do you reward creativity? Do you reward fundraising? What do you reward? What are people getting promoted? How are people getting promoted based on these things? You can't have both. So I have a leader right now. She was hired to do a level of philanthropy. She was hired to do that. She wasn't hired to be a great leader. So now you want her to be a great leader, but you've been rewarding all those other things, and now the gap is so big. It's like trying to put a fire out with a straw. It's just not going to happen. So I'm pretty, no nonsense.
Yeah. So I got a few more questions for you. So one time you and I were talking, and you kind of walked me into a tension to manage as a leader, and you were like, "Hey, Greg, a lot of times when you talk, you're kind of deferential in how you'll talk. You'll kind of downplay what you do, and you're like, you're good at your job, and you need to own it. Like you need to. In fact, I think you said, I think sometimes you're a little too humble. You're like, you need to just like, you're good at what you do. You need to stop different. And so it's a tension, because as a leader, whatever you're doing, you want to do so with a sense of confidence, right? If you're shooting a ball, you want to shoot it with a sense of confidence. People that shoot with confidence, the ball goes in more often than it doesn't, right? So anything you're doing with a sense of confidence, but of course it could tip into being egotistical, self-aggrandizing. And we've all seen leaders, right, that ventured into that. They think they're the golden gut. They think they're untouchable. They think the sun rises and falls and everybody exists to revolve around them. And so how would you describe a healthy leader with a healthy sense of confidence and they're self-assured and I'm good at what I do, without tipping over into a narcissistic or egotistic leader?
I think equal to saying this is what I'm good at, you also have to have a level of self-awareness about what you're not good at. So if you hired me to be an executive coach, like I know what I'm doing, just like you know what you're doing, but there's other elements that I may not know, and I need to be able to say that out loud. And so my team could come to me and say, hey, I know can you help me solve this problem? But can we create some space so I could bring you up to speed on X, Y, Z, so you can now see it from this lens or a different perspective? So you can be confident, but you also have to be vulnerable enough to say, so I'm not really good in that. So don't come to me with the part where I'm not really good at. Come to me. So I like to play to people's strengths. I don't like to play to their weaknesses. I just think we don't give people enough credit and due for the things that's going to move the needle, that's going to push a decision through pretty quickly, because you need an element of people that are focused on the today and the tomorrow. So, and I think it's okay to say, I know what I'm doing. Not every day, but it's a nice release. Like, you hired me, I have all these years of experience. I know how to do that really well, but I don't know how to do this very well. So maybe you need to go to someone else for that piece.
Yeah, one of the things I've noticed over years of working with people is I've been surprised how many people who, when I initially met them, my initial impression was, man, this is a really humble person. And the better I got to know them, the more I got to see, it was like, no, they're really not. Like they come off that way, but they're really not. And then I've been surprised the opposite way. There have been people I met that at first I thought were prideful, arrogant people. And then the more you work with them, you find out they're a great team player. They really aren't full of themselves. They just kind of present that way, right? And it could be for a variety of reasons why somebody, whether it's the image that they're wanting to put out there in the world, or they maybe lack a little bit of self-awareness on first impressions or whatever that might be. And as I've noticed that, like I've seen that in people, it makes me ask the question, well, what is humble? Like how would you know over time, like someone is humble? And I think like, because it's not just somebody who's self-deprecating. Like some of the people that are most self-assured are actually quite humble. And I think a big part of it is a person's teachability, like how much they're willing to learn from the people around them, how curious they are about the world. I think people that are arrogant often, they feel like they have all the answers. They have no curiosity.
They don't listen
around anybody. They don't listen to anybody. They don't think anybody has anything to offer them. So they're doing all the talking. They're not asking any questions, and they're not astute listeners. And I think when you feel like, man, I have a lot to learn, and this person in front of me, although they may fall somewhere on the org chart below you, or may have no relation to you. They may be somebody you meet on the street, or someone you know who's serving you in a restaurant. To think that these people have something to offer me, right? And I think how well people handle feedback. Like, I think that's big. Like, I think people that get very defensive on feedback sometimes are insecure, and like you say, it strikes a nerve. But others are kind of like, who are you to give me feedback? I'm, Mr. Miss Superstar. Like, I know it all. Like, how dare you? And I think I've noticed, people who are accomplished leaders, I've seen some who carry that sense of, I'm the smartest person in the room, and others who feel like everyone has something to offer them, even if it's just a nugget. Like, I could learn. Like, they're astute listeners, and they receive feedback in a humble way. It doesn't mean they're going to necessarily apply everything everybody says to them, but they really listen to it. They receive it. So what are some of those? What are some traits that you see, like, among, as you've worked with a variety of leaders who are in high positions? What are some of those common traits that you would say, whether it's humility or just success, like the common traits of really great leaders that you've seen?
Yeah, I would say a humble person to me, they say thank you in the moment when someone's praising them or affirming them. They don't downplay it. And the second part is they're always thinking about, how can we make it better? Like, this was great, and I really appreciate that, but where could I have been most effective? Like you said, being anchored in a level of curiosity. The other piece when it comes to feedback, it's two things. Feedback is either criticism or it's corrective. And people have to be taught how to receive it, and they need to be taught how to give it. And we don't give it, it's just due. We just think because we're a leader that we have the right to just recklessly give someone feedback. And most people think feedback, one piece of feedback is a trend, and it's just a data point. But if you don't create a space for me to, A, ask me if I'm in the mood to receive it, number one, which is I need to get it off my chest, or B, create the space for me to react one-on-one to maybe something I've never heard before. It doesn't mean I can't take it. It's just, wow, no, I've got this far in my career and no one's really given me feedback. That should be corrective. It's more about the criticism. And that's where people kind of go awry. And then the third piece I'll say is you have to be a servant leader. Like, you have to invert the org chart and really think about, what can I do to help you? How can I make it better for you? How could I create so much mind share in your day that you're not focusing on this stuff? You know that I have it. And if I don't have it, then I'm going to ask you for it. But I don't need you to be a part of that. And you have to be willing to be a servant leader and study it and learn how to do that really effectively. So those are some of the things that I look for.
So I guess I'm curious on your thoughts on this, because you mentioned corrective and critical as in terms of feedback. I will offer feedback sometimes to areas where I'm maybe not personally involved. I've just kind of been thin slicing my view of what they're doing, and feel like, based on my experience, or I might be able to offer them value with simply just a piece of feedback that to offer them as data. So this isn't a directive. I'm not saying go make this change. I don't even know if I feel strongly about it. I've observed this, I've seen this, and so I'm handing this to you because maybe you guys have been on the fence about it, and what I'm saying is confirmation for you. Mm-hmm. Or maybe it's something that you go, well, I think if he knew more, he probably would see it differently, and then maybe we have that conversation. But sometimes I've wrestled because I recognize, like, my place in this organization in particular if I go in and start saying, hey, here's what I would do, okay, that means
it's Bible.
That means you better do it.
You better do it.
Or if you don't do it, it better work.
Exactly.
Okay. You better be right. Okay. And so I've tried to sometimes soften it with like, because I don't know everything they know. I haven't been in the last 5 meetings they were in, but I happen to see something. And sometimes that outside set of eyes, I'm insider enough in this organization, I kind of know what's going on, understand the ethos and everything. But also I'm not down in the weeds of everything they're doing. So I go, maybe I can give them insightful feedback from a bit of an outsider, but what I don't want to do is make assumptions about this. And so I try to kind of couch it in that. I try to say, hey, this is what I saw, take it or leave it, here's for whatever it's worth, and then leave it alone. Do you think, is that helpful, or do you think that's confusing to people?
Confusing.
What coach me up.
Because you have to understand your positional power. So the fact that you're telling me, giving me the feedback, I'm already thinking, now the leader of the organization kind of knows what I've been up to. I better knock it off, or my job could be in jeopardy. The other piece is I like to teach people, like before it comes to you, I would offer that you anchor yourself in curiosity to figure out how many conversations has this person have, what was the outcome, what was the tone and texture of their response. Like really get curious and give the person, so say it's me, you, and Scott, teach me how to give the feedback or talk about the observations to Scott.
So I do, what I've been doing is like drive-by feedback, right? Like I'm just drive by, I see it, and I just, and go, and then I'm not emotionally attached to it, but I feel like I did them a service of just giving one guy's outsider opinion. But probably you're saying if I'm going to do that, I need to go the extra mile of getting curious and making sure that I'm not confusing them because of my position in the organization. Yeah. It ends up,
I don't like drive-by feedback, because in order for feedback to be corrective, I need to know that you care, and B, I need to know that you're just not going to automatically believe that person. Maybe they worked with you for a long period of time, or you have a personal relationship with them. Like I could feel like I'm never going to win if you're telling me. And then C, why do you need to have a drive-by feedback? Like you have leaders in place for that. If it comes to you, then I think the message should be a little firmer to say, listen, might want to knock it off. Like I've seen enough and I've heard enough. Now you would say it much nicer than me. But we want it to be corrective. And sometimes it can't be because the person's not willing to change. And then you have to make another decision. But if you don't say something, then it just infects the other part of the team. And it gets worse and worse and worse and worse. So my coaching to you today is get anchored in curiosity and stop the drive-by. Stop the drive-by.
I got 2 more questions. Do we have time? Okay. So I shouldn't have asked you that. Now I just lost my question. I had a good one. No.
Anchored in curiosity. Just stop it.
Well, I'll ask the second question first, because I was going to ask, this was the question I was going to ask last, is what drives you? Oh, no, I got the other one. So you can cut all that, right? You're good. Okay. Okay, so obviously experience, like to the level you've had with working for, decades with great companies and great leaders, that is invaluable, right? That's amazing amount of experience. And so the advantages are obvious of that. The disadvantages aren't as obvious, but are real, right? Which is you've mapped patterns. And, I've said this in the church sometimes with our pattern mapping, which is part of how we survive in the world, right? It's a psychological survival mechanism. One of the challenges with that is when you see something new or see something you recognize, you think this is that. So you go, well, yeah, I know this pattern, whether it's a type of person or a type of situation. And often that experience is extremely helpful in navigating this opportunity. But I think one of the liabilities is sometimes I go, well, this is that. I've seen this before. I've seen this kind of person before, this type of situation. But sometimes this isn't that. And so almost like that experience can actually be a liability, because I'm just defaulting to my playbook for a situation that maybe looks similar. It's like Mark Twain says, history never repeats itself, but it often rhymes. Does this thing kind of rhyme with that? And now I'm running a play that might not actually fit this situation. How do you process your way through and work your way through not just the strengths of your experience, but the potential liabilities of it?
Yeah, so when I'm doing pattern mapping, I never default to this is that. I listen a lot. And I'm a little still scarred when you said that. I never interrupt. I've really that's like some feedback from me. I got to really think about that, because this is like dialogue. So I'm listening, and I'm listening to the emotional connection, because people are people, right? And there's just a baseline level of attributes and language and emotions that I'm listening for. And while I don't have a ton of nonprofit, it's still, people want to be seen, heard, and validated at the end of the day. So I spend a lot of time with I like to listen and say, okay, I could see where this is going, but I need more data. And then for me, when I don't, the liability is, if I'm unsure about it, or I've seen it, but I'm not sure if it's going to fit there, then I'm asking more questions. Or I'll say, so I haven't really seen that, but here's what I'm thinking. Walk me through how you're seeing it, and then I'm gathering data from how that person is seeing it. But 9 times out of 10, in leadership and leading teams and working on teams and collaboration and peer-to-peer, it's the same. I want to be seen, heard, and validated. And I don't want you to get more than me, right? So it's that crab mentality a little bit. Or, well, how come I'm not being seen or heard or noticed? How come I'm not being seen, heard, or noticed? So I'm very clear about what I don't know, and I'm super clear with organizations I haven't had a lot of experience with. But 9 times out of 10, perception and reality.
I find myself, the older I get, the more experience I have, I find myself struggling to not just default to, I've seen this type of person before. I've seen this situation before. This is what we do. Because sometimes that is the right move. You're like, especially as you're coaching maybe a younger leader or less experienced leader, and they're maybe encountering something for the first time or early on, and so you're going like, hey, do this. You kind of want to be directive about it. But at the same time, I've been surprised by people who I had a perception of, or who I kind of thought I could anticipate where this thing was going to go, and it didn't. They surprised me. They a lot of times it does fall in that pattern, but I don't want to be so committed to my experience that I don't make room for an exception and allow someone to surprise me, and to to maintain that, optimism or optimism for a different outcome than what I've seen before. At the same time, you'd be a fool to put your head in the sand on things that you've seen and gleaned from your experience. So, I think that's where also having good, peer relationships, even outside of your job, outside of the people you work with, that maybe someone who does the same thing you do in another place, or there's a parallel to what you guys do, to be able to learn from their thought patterns and what they're seeing, and compare notes.
So I have a coach.
Yeah.
So even though I coach people, I have a coach, and I have a phenomenal trusted advisory kind of group that has been with me for about 25 years. So if it's something that I'm grappling with, or I need to think about how I need to frame something, or something doesn't feel good, I will reach out to them to say, am I thinking about this the right way? Or what have you seen? Or what kind of questions do you think this person is ready to hear? I'm meeting with a CEO in a couple weeks, and the first thing I asked was, so where's he from? Is he East Coast? Is he West Coast? Is he Midwest? Because that will determine how I show up. Not change my questioning, but my approach needs to be massaged a little bit, because the directness could be off-putting.
Yeah.
Misinterpreted. That's right. Yeah. Exactly.
What drives you at this point in your life? What drives you?
That's a good question. When people trust me early and they have confidence that I'm going to tell them what I think, and I'm going to share stuff from my experience and the things that I've gone through, so they can start on my shoulders and not at my feet. So it drives me when they go, I should have listened to you. Sorry, I didn't listen to you, or you were right, or okay, I now know that I need to kind of trust you early. So trust is a big thing to me. But that drives me when people listen and they do what I say. The world will just be so much better if you just do what I say when I'm coaching you. You may not want to put that in there.
Put it in.
Just do what I say. But I think we all have an element of that. Just, you don't have to make all the same mistakes. Just do what I say. But I really have learned how to listen. It has served me well. But I also know how to cut it off too, to say, okay, is it dialogue or direction, right? And I think there's only so much time and space for dialogue, and then I need you to go do, right? Because you're hiring me to solve a problem, and I take it very seriously. So I would say that drives me.
Shayla and I have talked about this on this podcast before, and actually I was just talking to another friend about, I've noticed as I've moved past 40, as I've gotten a little bit older, how much I'm driven by intrinsic rewards versus extrinsic rewards. So doing something I love doing, and not just that you got to be in your feels all the time and everything's just going to be, utopia or whatever, but there's certain work that just feels like breathing. It's like you're just like, man, my instincts are right. I feel like, not that I'm going to bat 1,000, but it feels good to be good at something, and it feels good to work with people who you have chemistry with, and even if you're working on something, I joke sometimes with our team about how if you're with the right people, even the worst job, like moving a house, right? Like if you've ever had show up in a U-Haul, that's just a horrible job. It just at this point in my life, it's like, dude, pay some movers, get a GoFundMe and pay some movers. Nobody wants to do that. I hate that job. But if you got the right mix of personalities, you pump up some music, and we're gonna make some memories, right? So even sometimes the right people, and then back to doing work that just gives you life, like you said. There's a reason you want to be trusted in those zones. It's not because you're on some power trip. It's because I've worked hard to develop these skills, to develop these instincts. So when I do say something, I'm not just, talking out of pocket. I'm not just throwing something against the wall and see if it sticks. It's well thought out. I've done a lot of listening. So these words are gold. And so if somebody take the gold and throw it away, it doesn't feel good, right? But when you see that gold put to good use in an organization, right, whatever they're making or whatever service they're providing, that's just a really good feeling, so I want to say thank you for allowing myself, our team here at the church, to be the beneficiary of those nuggets of gold. Thank you for this today, for sharing this out, and really appreciate you. Any final thoughts or words before we sign off?
Yeah, I would say thank you. You have a big job, you have a hard job, you have a fun job, but you always make people feel seen every time, especially, except when you look at your phone. But
I was actually going to pull up your website so I can promote your website, but if you don't want me to, I won't.
You make people feel seen every time you interact with them. So I just want to say thank you so much for giving me an opportunity.
Well, thank you. Your website, because I was pulling it up, but then you weren't being seen. So we got to get this right. It's let me see if I got it off the top of that. It's mindset coaching. No, it's something. There's another word in there.
It's mindset change coaching.
Mindsetchangecoaching.com.
Yes.
And so you can go check out those resources. And if you're looking for a great executive coach, I can vouch for one. Audra Christie, thank you so much.
Thank you.